Australia is a land of cruel ironies. It is a continent where you can drown in a flood one day and die of thirst the next. But the cruelest trap this land ever set was not a flood nor a fire. It was a dream. Welcome back to the archives. I am the silent investigator. Today we are opening case file number 002. It is a story that has haunted the Australian psyche for nearly a century. It is not a murder mystery, although a man did die. It is not a ghost story, although the spectre of this man still walks the Gibson Desert. It is the story of Harold Bell Lasseter, the man who found a mountain of gold and died for a loaf of bread. To understand why anyone listened to Lasseter, you have to understand the year 1929. The Great Depression had crushed the world. In Sydney, men in worn-out suits stood in bread lines that stretched for blocks. Hope was a currency that had lost all its value. The nation was bankrupt. Into this atmosphere of despair walked a man named Harold Lasseter. He was 50 years old, short, unassuming, with a voice that wavered between madness and absolute conviction. He walked into the offices of the Australian Workers' Union with a story that sounded like a fairy tale. He claimed that 30 years earlier, as a young man, he had stumbled upon a quartz reef in Central Australia. But this was no ordinary reef. He described it as a vast wall of gold, stretching for 10 miles, glittering in the desert sun. He claimed the gold was as thick as plums in a pudding. Under normal circumstances, he would have been laughed out of the room. But these were not normal times. Australia was desperate. And greed. Greed is a powerful drug. Lasseter produced a map. It was a chaotic scrawl of landmarks, lakes that might not exist, mountains that looked like others. But he swore he could find it again. He just needed an expedition. And so, the dream was bought. The Central Australian Gold Exploration Company, CAG, was formed. Investors threw money at him. They didn't see a short, delusional man. They saw salvation. July 1930. The expedition launched with the fanfare of a military operation. This was the Apollo 11 of the Australian outback at the time. They had a massive 6-wheeled Thornycroft truck designed to crush the desert spinifex. They even had an aircraft, the Golden Quest II, to scout from the sky. Leading the team was Fred Blakely, a seasoned bushman who knew the desert better than anyone. He was the realist to Lasseter's dreamer. But as the convoy moved deeper into the red heart of the continent, west of Alice Springs, the dream began to crack. The terrain was unforgiving. The heavy truck bogged down in sand dunes. The plane crashed, forcing the pilot, Errol Coote, to make a miraculous survival trek. Let's pause here and look at the chaos. This wasn't just a breakdown. It was a series of near-death experiences. The expedition's plane, the Golden Quest II, was their eye in the sky. But shortly after takeoff near Ayers Rock, Uluru, disaster struck. The engine failed. Errol Coote, the pilot, crashed violently into the scrub. The plane was a wreck of twisted metal and canvas. Coote survived, but he was stranded alone for 10 days while the rest of the party, including Lasseter, were miles away struggling with the truck. Think about the omen this presented. Before they even reached the supposed reef, the desert had already swatted their most advanced technology out of the sky like a fly. It was a clear warning. Turn back. But Lasseter, he didn't see the crash as a warning. He saw it as an annoyance. He was impatient. While Coote was fighting for his life, Lasseter was reportedly complaining that the delay was keeping him from his gold. This was the first sign of the gold fever that would eventually kill him. But the real breakdown wasn't mechanical. It was psychological. Fred Blakely began to watch Lasseter closely. He noticed that Lasseter's descriptions of the landscape kept changing. When they reached a landmark Lasseter had described, he would look confused. He would turn the map upside down. He would say, "No, it must be further west," or further south. Day by day, the heat rose. And day by day, Blakely's suspicion turned to contempt. He realized he wasn't leading an expedition to a gold reef. He was leading a nursery rhyme. In a secret telegram sent back to Sydney, Blakely wrote a single damning verdict about Lasseter. He called him a liar. There is a specific detail in Fred Blakely's logbook that reveals the exact moment the dream died. Blakely wasn't just guessing Lasseter was lying. He tested him.
You think you are the true explorer,
Throughout the
right?
journey, Blakely would ask Lasseter to identify landmarks from his original 1897 map. Lasseter would point to a hill and say, "That is Lake Christopher." But when they checked the compass bearings and the sextant readings, Lasseter was off by hundreds of miles. Blakely wrote that Lasseter's map was a fantasy of cartography. Lakes were drawn where mountains stood. Rivers flowed uphill. When confronted, Lasseter didn't admit a mistake. He claimed the landscape itself had changed. He claimed the mountains had moved. This is a psychological phenomenon known as confabulation. His brain was rewriting reality in real time to protect his ego. To Blakely, this was the final straw. He realised he was risking the lives of his men on the hallucinations of a man who couldn't tell north from south. By October, the tension was unbearable. The expedition had found nothing but dust and flies. Blakely called it off. He told Lasseter, "We are going home. There is no gold." This was the moment of truth. A con man would have cut his losses and returned to Sydney with an excuse, but Lasseter didn't. He doubled down. He was insulted. He was furious. He insisted the gold was just over the next horizon. Lasseter refused to return. He convinced another man, a dingo hunter named Paul Johns, to take him further with a string of camels. Imagine the psychology of this moment. Everyone else has left. The experts have called you a fraud, but you keep going. Is this the persistence of a genius, or the obsession of a madman? Lasseter and Paul Johns rode into the Petermann Ranges, but soon even Paul Johns realised the futility. Lasseter's directions were nonsense. Johns accused him of being crazy. They fought, and finally Johns left too. Harold Lasseter was now truly alone. Just a 50-year-old man, 2 camels, and a desert that stretches for thousands of kilometres. He walked into the silence, and the silence swallowed him. What happened next is recorded in one of the most tragic documents in Australian history, Lasseter's diary. It was January 1931, the height of summer. The temperature in the Gibson Desert soars above 45 degrees Celsius. The rocks are hot enough to burn skin. Lasseter's Camp Uat was near a place now known as Hull's Cave, and then the catastrophe happened. According to his scribbled notes, his camels bolted. Perhaps they smelled water, or perhaps they were spooked by dingoes, but they ran. And they took everything. They took the water supply, they took the food. Lasseter ran after them, stumbling through the sand, screaming until his throat was raw. But the desert doesn't care about screams. The camels were gone. He was stranded, no transport, no food, limited water. For 16 weeks. Let me repeat that. 16 weeks. Lasseter survived in that cave. He became a shadow of a man. He ate berries, grubs, anything he could find. He grew weaker, his body consuming itself. A local Aboriginal family found him. They were the Petjantjatjara people. They saw his condition. They offered him food and water. They tried to care for him. But here the tragedy deepens. In his delirium, ravaged by starvation and paranoia, Lasseter didn't see helpers. He saw enemies. He wrote in his diary that the blacks were menacing him. He fired his revolver to scare them away. He fled from the very people who were his only hope of survival. His mind had broken before his body. As March turned to April, Lasseter knew the end was coming. He could no longer walk. He lay in the dirt, the flies swarming his face, his hand shaking as he held a blunt pencil stub. He wrote letters to his wife, Renee. He wrote about the gold. He drew maps. He was obsessed to the very last breath. One entry reads, "What good is gold to me now that I am dying of thirst? I would give it all for a loaf of bread." Think about that trade. $1 billion of gold for a single piece of bread. His final entry is heartbreaking in its simplicity. He wrote, "Dear Renee, I have done my best. Don't let the children forget me." Harold Bell Lasseter died alone in the sand. His body was shriveled, his eyes open to the blinding sun. He died believing he was the richest man in the world. Months later, a bushman named Bob Buck found Lasseter's body and the diary. But the investigation doesn't end with the body. We need to talk about the man who found him, Bob Buck. Bob Buck was a bushman of the old school. Tough, silent, and creating his own laws. He was sent to find Lasseter. When he returned, he handed over Lasseter's diary and a few personal effects. But rumours have swirled for decades in Alice Springs. Did Bob Buck find everything? Lasseter wrote in his diary that he had buried a roll of film and the updated map under the floor of the cave. Those items were never officially turned in. Some believe Bob Buck found the map. They say he spent the next few years making mysterious trips into the Petermann Ranges, always alone, always returning with high-quality gold nuggets to pay for his supplies. Did Bob Buck find Lasseter's Reef? Or did he just find a dead man's delusion and decide to keep the legend alive for his own profit? We will never know. Buck took that secret to his grave. The story exploded in the press. But the Reef, the 10 miles of gold, it has never been found. Geologists today tell us that the rock formations in that area, mostly sandstone and metamorphic rock, are extremely unlikely to hold a gold reef of that magnitude. It is geologically impossible. So, what is my verdict? I have analysed the maps. I have read the diaries. I don't believe Lasseter was a liar in the traditional sense. A liar knows the truth and hides it. Lasseter was something more dangerous. He was a believer in his own delusion. Perhaps, decades earlier, a young Lasseter saw sunlight hitting a quartz vein at a specific angle, making it glow like fire. And over 30 years of poverty and failure, his mind polished that memory. He didn't just remember gold, he needed the gold to exist. He created a reality so strong that he convinced an entire nation, and eventually, he convinced himself to die for it. Today, people still go out there. They buy metal detectors and expensive 4WDs. They call themselves Lasseter's hunters. Some of them disappear, just like he did. Because the gold of Lasseter's Reef isn't in the ground, it's in the mind. It is a contagion, a virus of greed that the desert planted in us just to watch us dig our own graves. But that is just my theory. The file remains open. The desert keeps its secrets. If you enjoyed this investigation into the madness of men, subscribe to the channel. I am the Silent Investigator. Case closed.